Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Florida State Representative Anna Eskamani. Thank you so much for joining me, Representative.
Thank you for having me.
Over the weekend, the country saw another racist shooting that claimed the lives of 3 Black Americans, this time in Jacksonville, Florida. You represent Florida's 42nd district in the state house, but you were in Jacksonville within recent days to attend a rally. So first, can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, first of all, this is such a tragedy for us here in Florida. And not the first time we've had a mass shooting, let alone the first time we've seen extremism cause harm and violence. In fact, I woke up Saturday morning to Nazi vandalism on different LGBTQ plus murals in my district in Orlando. And then when the sun sets, we hear news of this shooting at a Dollar General by a young racist white man murdering 3 African Americans. And it's still something that we're processing. It's deeply painful. And I went to Jacksonville to attend a rally focused on opposition to white supremacy. And I have to tell you, Brittany, there was powerful testimonies given, but there was also a lot of anger with the fact that Governor Ron DeSantis attended a vigil the day before and was allowed to speak. I think that there is a fair amount of anger about just DeSantis's policies, especially in the context of African American history and just Black lives overall, that the notion that he attended this vigil and then took the microphone did not sit well with the residents of Jacksonville.
I want to dive a little deeper into that. You actually tweeted a moment from that vigil, and I want to ask you specifically about that. You quote tweeted the video of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis getting booed before making remarks at that vigil. And this is the tweet you reposted. It read, quote, "Your policies caused this. Ron DeSantis is booed so much at vigil for the Jacksonville shooting victims, he's forced to stop talking." And you wrote on top of that, quote, "This is how so many Floridians feel." Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, so a few months back, the NAACP issued a travel advisory warning African Americans and Black Americans to travel with caution in Florida because their lives are at risk. And the governor tossed it aside as being politically motivated, but this was what the NAACP was trying to stress. This was the point they're trying to make, is that when you have a state and a governor that not only has attempted to ban protests for Black liberation, specifically House Bill 1 a few years ago was in response to Black Lives Matter protests, and it was really designed just to target protesting of Black and brown people, all the way to maybe the most current headlines where you have African American history being whitewashed. The governor wants people to think that he wants our children to think that African Americans benefited from slavery, to books being removed and restricted because they talk about stories of people of color, immigrants, and LGBTQ plus people. You, of course, see all this elevated rhetoric that targets immigrants and different marginalized communities. These policies are not happening in a vacuum. And that's a point that I've tried really hard to make to my Republican colleagues, that when you pass legislation that dehumanizes people, then you can expect it to radicalize some. And this is what took place. I know investigations are still pending, but this 21-year-old was clearly radicalized to have perspectives that were bigoted and racist and subscribed to white supremacy. And that's why when the governor arrives at a vigil that is the result of a racist act. I've also seen a lot of folks be frustrated with the term racially motivated, because I don't think it really gives the situation the specifics it needs. Like, this was not just racially motivated, this was racist. This was someone that had a clear motive, was very lucid in their perspectives, and otherized Black Americans and Black people overall. And that's why I think when these folks were booing the governor, it's just a reflection of so much of our frustration as Floridians, where we have real problems to solve, from the property insurance crisis, the rising cost of rent. We have huge teacher shortage in Florida, 7,000 open vacancies in education right now. But of course, our governor is too busy running for president to care. And I think that's where the boos come from. And that's why I do feel like those boos were a reflection of how many people are feeling in our state.
One of your colleagues who actually represents Jacksonville at the state level said that Governor DeSantis has blood on his hands. First, what do you make of that comment? And second, do you agree? Do you think Governor DeSantis has blood on his hands from this shooting?
I'm not sure if that was Representative Angie Nixon. I will
Yes.
say that. Okay, so Representative Angie Nixon, she is one of the most passionate representatives for Duval. She is homebred and spoke at the rally that I attended, and she's always been such an incredible advocate, especially for the northwest side of Jacksonville. And so I do think that her point is very valid. And, what she's attempting to, what she's trying to illustrate, and what many have also echoed, is that these policies that the governor has endorsed, the governor has campaigned on, candidly, the governor has built his entire political career on divisive, distracting, and deflective policies. That has been his entire arch to power in the Republican Party, has been on the backs of marginalizing other people, bullying other people. And so the comment that she made, I think it just speaks to how someone does not become radicalized out of nowhere. Radicalization is a tactic by the far right and by all these different types of what we thought were underground groups that now have been very public. I mean, we have Nazis that are waving their flags alongside DeSantis flags many times in Florida. This is their recruitment strategy, right? Whenever they commit an act of vandalism, whenever they are protesting, they're holding their websites. They want people to learn about them because their intention is to expand their reach. And they are empowered by someone like DeSantis, who does not make any efforts to denounce their actions until it's too late, but has fed them, has added not just the match to the flame, but he's fueled the flames. And now he has to feel the smoke of it. And I hope that he'll learn from this and will stop supporting these policies and stop amplifying some of these spokespeople that, continue to add to this fervor. But I'm not hopeful about that, because I think without it, DeSantis doesn't really have a presence in the Republican Party. Indeed, we're seeing that at a national scale when he's flailing on stage. Again, this is a guy that was never ready for prime time, but his entire political prominence has been built on extremism, and that doesn't seem to necessarily get you as far as you want to go, even within a Republican primary.
This was a racist act. It is being investigated as a hate crime, as we know, because it just happened Saturday. But from what you're saying, are you saying there's a direct crime that you believe, or there's a direct link from what you believe from Governor DeSantis' policies to this incident?
I think that it adds to the climate where dehumanizing people that are different from you is seen as acceptable. We have progressed so much as a country to embrace diversity, to be open to debate of ideas, and to evolve as people. And unfortunately, in Florida, under leadership of Governor Ron DeSantis, it's been the opposite. We've seen debate be canceled. We've seen diversity be banned, especially in the context of higher education right now, but he's even attempted to ban diversity education in businesses. And of course, we have seen individuals in the legislature, kind of just become drunk on power, where they're not even entertaining different ideas or perspectives because they don't need to. That's been the climate in the legislature. And so obviously, there's other dynamics to this. I mean, in particular, easy access to firearms has also created the climate that we're in. And Governor DeSantis did sign permitless carry into law. And the legislature actually wanted to reduce the age to purchase an assault rifle from 21 back to 18. Unfortunately, the Senate did not entertain that. So the buying age is still 21. But this young domestic terrorist who murdered 3 people, he legally acquired all of his firearms. And so what does that say about our ability to also put into place common sense gun safety legislation to try to prevent that from happening? So I think there are responsibilities on the hands of policymakers in any situation of terror or natural disaster to that point. But at the end of the day, this is one individual who committed a crime, but he's committed that crime and that murder in the context of a larger ecosystem that the political climate has created.
Let's talk about that a little further, because what you're saying, when there is a shooting in this country, I mean, we do see the same cycle. Largely, Democrats come out and say we need common sense gun reform, we need stricter gun laws. Republicans largely say now is not the time to get political. So when do you think the time is to get political?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it can be very uncomfortable for folks that, also are not that political already. I think for those of us that live and breathe politics, it might feel more natural. My perspective is that everything is political. One of the phrases that I grew up learning when I was in college is the personal is political. And that basically speaks to how every part of our lives, good or bad, has a political connection. And so I think that every moment is going to be political in nature. It is important when it comes to prioritizing your response that you always center on the victims, right? And I will say many victims, whether it's in situations of gun violence or other situations, they help set the tone too. And we should focus on crisis response. I have been actively sharing, for example, the GoFundMe campaigns and of those impacted, because I do think it's important that we take care of those impacted regardless of politics. That should be everyone's responsibility. But at the end of the day, when you have a crisis, and especially one like this where it just keeps happening, I mean, we've had so many mass shootings in America and they don't seem to be ending. We have false alarms in Florida, and you have to take everyone seriously because the risk of it being true is so high that if you don't, then you might regret it. So we have this climate now, this culture now, where we always think that there's a gun involved, even when there isn't. But a part of that is we've created a state where guns are everywhere. And so I do think that there is clear public responsibility here. I think that political action is necessary. And I will tell you, being at the rally in Jacksonville, that was the call to action. There was actually a very powerful testimony from many faith leaders. And one of the faith leaders said, I didn't come here to pray, I came here for revolution. And I do think that the attitude, even among communities who may typically shy away from politics, has changed, because too much blood has been lost on the ground, these acts of shooting, for us to continue to pretend like politics doesn't play a role, or for us to be scared to talk about politics at this time.
I mean, we know this wasn't a mass shooting because 3 people were shot and killed, but the Gun Violence Archive does classify that as 4 or higher. But the Gun Violence Archive also says this is going to be it's on track to be the most deadliest year since they started tracking a decade ago. This is a problem that affects Americans all across the country here. What would you like to see? What would you like that revolution to be, both at the state level and the federal level?
So I love this question, because one area of the conversation that we tend not to address is community violence intervention programs, which I'm sad to say Governor DeSantis vetoed millions of dollars that the legislature had appropriated to violence intervention programs. And what do I mean by violence intervention? These are programs that are evidence-based, that focus on a hyper-local level to identify the common types of gun violence and the common locations, and who are the individuals who are most impacted or interacting with the gun violence, and to actually hire and recruit peer-to-peer specialists that are in the community that can help detect, for example, if retaliatory gun violence is going to take place, to help prevent it. And because we can't ignore the fact that we have gun violence that is hyper concentrated in our communities of disadvantage, that is overlooked and neglected. And so we have to invest at that local level. And again, in Florida, we're trying. In fact, City of Orlando, we've taken leftover ARPA money for the American Rescue Plan to put it into CVI programs, and we're seeing reductions in homicides from gun violence. In the larger scale, we also have a mental health crisis, especially among our youth. And I think we're really facing a challenge in identifying strong mentors for our young men. When you think about some of the most popular male figures in media right now, and I'm not really talking about celebrities in TV or film, I'm more talking about some of this online content. Those who are most popular on Discord or Instagram or YouTube, they tend to be very hyperbolic characters that carry misogynistic perspectives, that carry homophobic, transphobic perspectives, that also are inclined to talk about firearms. And I think there's a huge gap here in helping to identify and support mentors who don't do that, who young men can relate to. And so I think part of violence prevention is also figuring out where is this radicalization coming from and how do we counter it? And there are some amazing organizations. Mara's Voice is a nonprofit that's based out of the Florida State University, because that is where we had the shooting at a yoga studio. And that individual who murdered individuals who were in this yoga studio, we later identified as an incel and was anti-women, and he had really anti-women perspectives. So again, we see this pattern, right, of radicalization, especially among young men, that we're not being proactive in addressing. And that's not even a gun control debate. That's more just mental health intervention programming, but it's a part of ending gun violence. It's also addressing these categories. And then of course, on the gun prevention, the gun access prevention piece for people that should not have firearms. I echo the comments by others around background checks, other types of red flag programs and so forth. I don't think you can ignore access to a firearm adding to this violence, but we also need some serious investments in just violence intervention and violence prevention as a whole.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious, if you could deliver a message to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, what would that message be?
I would tell the governor to sit down and listen. Listen to the pain that families are going through. Listen to their policy ideas. Don't pretend like you have all the answers, and also stop maintaining such an extreme perspective on people who are different from you. I was very frustrated by the governor attending the vigil and speaking in general. I think, of course, attending a vigil as governor is your responsibility. You don't always have to speak. In fact, the rally that I attended in Jacksonville, I did not speak. I just listened. It's really important for us as policymakers and elected officials to know when it's not our time and when we just need to sit and listen.
Representative Eskamani, I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.